Hi everybody, welcome to today's NBS webinar, which is looking at the best practice guide to specification writing, which is a publication that's now live on our website. Today's webinar is in association with our sponsors for this webinar, Vectorworks, so thank you to them. I think it's probably going to be about 55, 60 minutes. We'll try and bring it in under the hour. Got lots of people attending today. It's around 2,000. It's a huge number. And everyone's microphones are muted, but please give us the feedback, ask the questions. One of the best things about doing these webinars is seeing the feedback afterwards. So please keep that coming in. And what we're going to cover today is a brief introduction to the guide from myself. And then we'll spend a good 45 minutes with our panel discussing some of the principles in the guide, and then just give instructions on where you can download the guide from at the end. So my name's Stephen Hamill, Innovation Director here at NBS, and I'm very pleased to say we've got a great panel. We've got Ruth King from AHMM. We have Adrian Shilday representing the contractor side from Galliford Try. And we've got Andrew Scott Greener from NBS, from our NBS Schumann spec consultancy side. So it spends all day writing specifications, so a great person to have on as well. So yeah, best practice specification guide. It's a Microsoft Word document that provides a framework with illustrated examples on how at NBS we believe is the best way to prepare robust specifications. The purpose is like maybe architectural practices, engineering practices can take this document, maybe tweak it a little bit, and make it their guide for writing specifications across their practice. So if you're a very small practice, you might only have one person that writes specs, but the larger you get, you want to try and get that consistency on every project. And it's not just there for architect, engineering practices, but maybe also for your larger main contractors that increasingly employ design partners, architects, engineers on contractor-led projects, because maybe wanting to get that consistency, especially on the larger projects, across all of the specifications that they're receiving. And maybe also at the sort of top end, those sort of professional client developers that want consistency across an entire, say, framework of projects as well. So this document actually came from a lot of focus groups we've done with main contractors and discussions with clients. And then finally, also just to promote good specification writing in education. So we're hoping this is a guide that universities will use when sort of training construction professionals. Let's just jump into the actual guide itself rather than sort of just PowerPoint things to death. But yeah, it's a Microsoft Word document, downloadable, Creative Commons, so that you can sort of tweak it and make it specific to your projects, the way you work. Very quickly on acknowledgements, we've done a few preview sessions with different industry groups just to try and get as tight as possible, have some great feedback, but a special thanks to colleagues over the years. So I've been the author and pulled it together, but I've been at NBS 26 years now, and a big thank you to the likes of Richard Waterhouse and John Gelder, who sort of built up a lot of this in the past. Then my colleague Paul Swaddle, who first developed the specification CPD that we do on this topic. And then more recently, in the last sort of 3 or 4 months, putting this guide together, my colleague James Smith, who's senior technical author at NBS, and Andrew from the Schumann team, who's on today. If we just have a little look, the table of contents on the left-hand side sort of introduces the topic. And then we have little guidance notes that you might want to read and delete at the top of each topic. It's all written for whatever software you use to write your specs. So if you use Microsoft Word to write your specs, it's not written, you have to use NBS. But for those that do use NBS, there's little links at the bottom where you can go to our support pages. So how do you do a style sheet or what have you? There's a hyperlink. But again, you can remove those if you wish. And then we have sort of little like illustrations, good practice, bad practice, get another thanks to our sponsor Vectorworks, who provided illustrations in here as well, which look really nice. And then jumping back to the presentation, it's not a huge document, it's around 40 pages or so in the 10 sort of subsections, which I think each one, like anyone working in construction could have a meeting and a sort of discussion of how they want to do things best. Hopefully picked sort of 10 good topics, but basically the editorial principles, how you're going to structure your specification in terms of the section structure, the primary classification system, like design responsibility. Like most projects now have some element of contractor design, so it's a really important topic. Specification is just one set of information that's got to be cross-referenced from other specifications, schedules, drawings, so how you do the cross-referencing from reference codes. Best practice on publishing, so generally specifications get published to PDF, and how you actually sort of name those, what metadata goes with them. On all projects, it's going to be some level of change. So how do you indicate that change in the specification as the project timeline advances? Best practice in terms of when you reference manufacturers by name, or you leave manufacturer decisions to the contractors team. Whether you want to use the specification just as a specification or tag it so you can pull information out of it. Saying in a digital world, increasingly important. A little bit on digital technologies. Interest in digital technologies is like towards the end. Most of the presentations you do are all around digital technologies, but it's about sound specification writing in the main. And then a little section at the end where you can put in your own organization-specific guidance, links to your intranet or external websites, CPD, etc. So you can make this document your own. Loads of content there. So what we try to do for this webinar is just focus on 4 parts. If it would be useful to do another webinar on the other items, let us know in the feedback at the end, and maybe this could be like a webinar part 1, and we do a sort of follow-up as well. But we had a little prep session with the panelists today, and these were the sort of 4 areas we thought we'd spend 10 minutes each discussing. So yeah, hi, we've got all our panelists back on. And let's just look at this first topic, editorial principles. And I've just got a few screenshots from the guide on the sort of webinar here, but just want to first maybe go to yourself, Andrew. Like the NBS Schumann team spent it's working with practices out there on huge projects or sorting out masters. And so what are your sort of tips on just getting specifications right?
I mean, first, Stephen, thanks for the opportunity to sort of take part in this discussion. It's something that I'm personally certainly passionate about, having spent 20 years in practice kind of design and coordinating and delivering buildings of all shapes and sizes and complexities. And the specification has always been the backbone of that project documentation. Now, I suppose don't want to spook anybody too soon, but a clear and accurate specification is a vital part of any successful project. I like to try and think of that specification as kind of the glue that brings together all the other elements of project documentation. You're going to look to sort of embed quality and capture the technical details, reference to sort of governing local standards, things that you might be tempted to put in the drawing, but a really better place to go into a specification document. And it's going to help ensure that the works are executed to the relevant levels of quality and performance standards. Now, sort of personally, over the years, obviously not everything always goes right in the project, and sometimes things do go wrong. So there's been a few sort of sticky situations and being on the pointy end of discussions around issues that arise, and being able to present the specification and point to the relevant part on performance or maybe its execution or workmanship. It has often been enough to draw a line under that issue and allow us to move on as a team to the next stage of the works. And really fundamental to producing a sort of strong supporting specification document are those 7 C's around ensuring that the content is, like you say, clear, concise, correct, complete, comprehensive, consistent, and coordinated. And that's just going to help ensure that you're embedding quality and mitigating risk while clearly sort of communicating your intentions and requirements to the other parties that are involved.
Like, I guess just that first example on the screen there, where something's ambiguous, that's potentially an argument waiting to happen, isn't it? Because your intention could be that there's going to be tiles of every single tile type as samples and each color in special form and a certain number, but you've just written provide samples or whatever then.
Of course. Yeah, again, it's about being clear and setting out your sort of expectations for the contractor or supply chain or the specialist, and sort of letting them know that what you want to see and when, and ideally for what reason. So just being clear, unambiguous, avoiding any misunderstandings that might crop up and lead to delays or potentially the wrong thing arriving on site, worst case scenario.
And Ruth, at AHMM, you've got hundreds of colleagues working on tens and tens of projects. How do you get consistency across your specifications across such a big practice?
We've developed a huge amount of Office Master templates, actually, which allow architects to get a good start in their specification writing process. And that helps set the standard that we expect in AHMM. And that we're also quite keen to emphasize to teams not to repeat information. So if there's performance data on a drawing, don't try and put it in the specification. Make sure that information is just in one place, because again, that can lead to conflicts and can lead to potential arguments, which everyone wants to avoid.
And what's that balance between how much you put on the drawing and how much you write in the specification, Ruth, would you say?
I think it depends. It depends on the package that you're looking at. It depends on the visual quality that you're looking for and what you're trying to protect in the design intent. Obviously, there are some things that you'd put on the drawing that you wouldn't necessarily put in the specification, dimensions, things like that. But the quality and workmanship that you can specify is incredibly important to be clear in the specification.
And will you sometimes write something like C drawings or C fire consultants report in the spec?
We do that. We do a lot of cross-referencing to make sure that the tenderer, the supplier, the manufacturer, whoever is aware of where different information is saved. I think navigation is really incredibly important. So we actually use T-sheet codes so that you'll have an element in the drawing package that's got a specific code, and then you can navigate with that code straight into your specification.
Yeah, and those sort of what you call like T-sheet codes, the sort of specification references, I think we actually have a subsection on the cross-referencing aspect that's in the document. Adrian, I guess we've gone from spec consultants to coordinating specs across a large practice to that level where you're sitting there across a lot of projects, then a lot of design partners, specialists. Is it possible to get this right across such a wide scope of other parties?
I think it is really difficult, and I think everybody knowing what their responsibilities are is really, really important, and how the specifications are put together around how they're coordinated and the notes that we've put into the guide. And it's been great to be involved in that and share the lessons learned of what we've seen on previous projects, that the architects and engineers, structural, civils, services, they are all talking to each other, that we understand the structure, and it makes it's comprehensive. And I think off the back of the Building Safety Act, it becomes really, really important that it is complete, it is comprehensive, it refers to the correct standards, which I think there's probably a bit of a wider industry challenge around understanding of standards and how the specification highlights those specific requirements. We as contractors, and we pass down to our subcontractors, it's really, really clear what we need to price, what we need to build. And as Ruth mentioned around the quality requirements, that's certainly our key challenge at the moment, what we build out on site and how we manage that.
Andrew, just going back to the Schumann team, do you have similar to Ruth a set of masters that you sort of have for different sectors, or how do you get that consistency across the Schumann team?
Yeah, again, we have masters at our end that we use as the basis for projects, something that we also have to keep well maintained, keep them up to date, reflecting current best practice and changes in the industry. And again, using those as the basis for development of project-specific documentation for our clients.
Yeah. Okay, let's just move on to the sort of next one. We're going to talk about classification and spec structure. I'll just sort of leave that screen in the background, but I guess this is different around the world. If you're in Australia, it's different to Canada, to USA, but for UK and Ireland, there seems to be two choices, whether it's the sort of common arrangement of work section structure or the uniclass structure. And maybe just go to Adrian first, again, across lots of projects, lots of practices. Is there any consistency here for you, or are you trying to enforce consistency? What do you think?
I think there's probably been a mix of approach across industry, across the consultants. And I think it was interesting, the conversations we've had before, Stephen, around that elemental piece. I think that will start to really drive a bit more consistency, because at the end of the day, what we build out on site and how we get our supply chain, we need to understand how all those products talk to each other. So the elemental specification, the example you've got, whether it's a roof or a wall builds up, what are each of those systems and products that make up that element. So it makes it really important that the classification, the structure is really clear, that we can go from project to project and we see the same things in the same place, particularly when we're working across sectors where we want to drive consistency of approach in terms of the materials and how we build. And that feeds very much into our quality on site. And again, as we've spoken before, we use the Uniclass as part of our quality check sheets. And that means there's a consistent sort of follow through from the design to the specification and into how we check the quality on site. So it's really, really important that there is a now push towards a much more standard approach.
And are you leaning towards Uniclass at Galliford Try?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, so we investigated how we could structure all of our site quality check sheets. We went around looking at CISFB, NRM, and we ended up settling on Uniclass because so much now of our client requirements very much model based, and absolute requirement to have Uniclass within both drawings and the models and the data. And it made a lot of sense for us to go down that route. And that's across all of our sectors, whether it's building, infrastructure and highways. Their handover requirements are based on Uniclass, and now BIM for water as well, moving down that route. So it made a lot of sense for us to use Uniclass as our structure for our check sheets. And then that familiarity coming from the design and specification just makes that crossover a lot easier.
In fact, just stay with you, Adrian, for a second, because you mentioned the importance of the elemental specification. And is that the sort, to play back your words to you, is that the sort of glue that then allows you to say, this is the performance for the wall or the roof?
Yes.
And then you talk to multiple disciplines, say structural engineer and architect,
Yes.
and say, as you put your systems together, I want this.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really important that the overall fire performance or U values or air tightness is really, really clear, because that often will tie into energy modeling as well. And whatever types of tools that you're using, we then need to be able to break that down into individual systems and products. And that crosses over then into whether it's performance, into embodied carbon. We're having to do a lot of that now for all of our projects. So it makes it really, really important that they're coordinated. So the elemental specification, and probably examples that we've seen before where the system or the products will say the U value needs to achieve this, but then another part of the system would also say the same thing again and again and again. So you could have duplication across insulation requirements within systems, but it all sits within a wall. So again, we were seeing things doubled up, or in the worst case, it's not meant at all in terms of the overall performance. So it gets completely missed. So I can see Andrew nodding. He's seen the same things as us. And I think that's just teams just getting their heads around that standard approach, breaking it down elementally, almost developer style specification. What is the overall principles of the project? How do we then explain that to each of the teams, the design team meetings, into construction meetings, and then we break it down into the next level of systems. and we break it down into the next level of products. And that's how we've also approached our check sheets as well.
I guess that helps the lead design who's maybe coordinating the structural engineer, the fire consultants, all come together for this element.
Absolutely. And I think we've talked about the responsibilities we'll come on to a little bit later. We very definitely see off the back of the Building Safety Act and also Edinburgh schools around specification coordination, whether it's brickwork, making sure the brickwork specification from the designer, architect, coordinates with the structural requirements for the brickwork, whether it's ties and supports and channels and lintels, etc. So again, the team working together, the lead designer being a really, really key part of that, bringing everything together, and they collaborate on the specifications rather than working in silos is going to be really important going forward.
Just, I can't see the questions coming in, but I imagine there'll be a question of like, is this possible in cores as well? And I think it's fair to say we do have a B section in cores that has a sort of similar concept of an element where you can manually cross-reference.
Yeah, I think I remember it back, putting my old architect's hat back on. I worked in cause, and it was great to see Uniclass coming in because, the language is similar, and it still takes a little bit of time to get your head around the F10s, F11s, etc. But the same principles would apply in cause as well, and you might have to then preface with the elemental, as you say, within the B section to break it down into the same principles.
Inside the guide itself, there's a link to the sample specs we have online for our sort of fictional lakeside restaurant where there's Uniclass and cause examples. So in addition to this sort of free guide, there's also free sample specs you can download as well. I think AHMM use Uniclass as well. So I'm going to come to Ruth and ask about spec structure. And then, Andrew, I want you to say a few words about cause afterwards, because I haven't set this up as a sort of Uniclass. But Ruth, I guess you want consistency again across all your projects, AHMM, standardized masters. How do you come to the decision of what classification you use?
Well, we've got about 100 projects in NBS Chorus now. And of those, I think 98 are in Uniclass. I mean, we've got 2 left that are cause. And the reason we went to Uniclass a couple of years ago was because it suits the way we design systems. So and how we define performances across elements, as Adrian sort of mentioned. So we don't want to split up a wall into blockwork, insulation, and then a finish. You want to specify the performance across the whole system. And Uniclass lends itself to that really well. And it helps us with our navigation to the drawings as well, by using that, by being able to have a single code for an entire wall and then a single spec that you can refer to.
If you had a lot of pushback, how do you convince a sort of colleague that wants to stay using cores because that's what they've always used?
We have had a bit of pushback, especially architects. We're on projects for years at a time, and it might be that you're coming to Uniclass quite fresh. So explaining the benefits of Uniclass, that as I said, that you can specify a whole performance, and that just aids the drawing workflow. We've managed to convince most people that Uniclass is the way to go.
Okay, Andrew, I'm going to come to you now. Now, the client's always correct. So I imagine you work with lots of different clients, and it's maybe 50-50 a mix. Core still works for projects, doesn't it, as well?
Of course, yeah. I say one of the initial discussions we'll have with a client is around which structure they want to adopt and their reasons why. Sometimes that may change once we have a chat about what we're trying to achieve with a project. But yeah, so a lot of clients wanting to use cores, which is absolutely fine. But we are seeing a lot of clients come to us regarding masters, but looking at that for Uniclass, which is maybe an indicator of, a strategic shift in people's thinking. But I just want to pick on 2 points that Adrian made that really resonated with me, about like understanding that the content of the specification is able to sort of reach more broadly across a project, and being able to sort of link that content into site management processes and workflows is really key. And then also the elemental approach, whether that is in cause or uniclass, gives that opportunity to kind of throw away the Word document that might be used for an outline spec typically, and really embed the specification in the outset of a project, and then build on it using the kind of constituent systems link that you have in uniclass. But yeah, both fit for purpose, both great at what they do. Cause is sometimes like a bit of a warm hug, sometimes from an old familiar friend when you go back to it. But yeah, no, there's definite benefits in both approaches. Uniclass, I think there's obviously a little bit of resistance from the wider market sometimes. It's unfamiliar. It appears daunting at first sight, but I think using codes like Ruth has mentioned helps sort of build familiarity. It helps you can navigate through a lot quicker because you're searching for a code, not necessarily a kind of numerical digit reference to something. But also, being aware of the way that uniclass works with the shared information, and keeping your specification tidy, keeping your linkages correct, and not duplicating things by mistake, or necessarily consolidating and removing duplicates. That's just going to help that end user, be it the contractor, the client, the guy on site, to understand and work with that information.
And I know that the Schumann team work across the world, to Middle East, and we've got colleagues over in North America and things, and the whole, like, forget about the actual coding itself, but like when you actually see the chapter of the spec, the section, just having clear subsections. I know the Australian and the North American systems have a sort of 3-part spec where you sort of reduce it, then you have the products and materials, then you have execution, and you know that samples are going to be either in 2 or subsection 2 or what have you. I guess across all of the Schumann masters, you've got a sort of standard set of rules for the structure itself.
We do, yeah. It's incredibly important to kind of set out those performance requirements, regardless of the classification. Make sure you're setting those in the correct location and capturing them concisely, and then moving on to the kind of the body of the spec and the products, or the kind of target requirements, and then execution and workmanship and completion. All incredibly important across all formats. And
then real consistency in terminology when you want things like inspections, examinations, prototypes, etc. So it's just laid out with a lot of thought.
Exactly, yeah, and also sort of adjusting that terminology where needed to suit the kind of project location or the classification system that you're working in, to make sure it's kind of clear, and that just helps build confidence in the documentation when people are working with it and reading it.
Nice. And then going on to sort of design responsibility, and the document itself cross-references the RIBA plan of work that I think back in 2013, I think it was, really nicely introduced the terminology of prescriptive versus descriptive, and increased amount of specialist design, and linking that back to a sort of design responsibility matrix, etc. I'm going to start with yourself, Ruth, and I've got a couple of illustrations. How do you get design responsibility reflected correctly in the specifications that you develop?
Well, as you mentioned, the design responsibility matrix, setting that out right at the beginning of the project is absolutely fundamental, especially as a lot of our projects are design and build. So establishing where there's going to be aspects of subcontracted design is critical. Chiefly, we use the matrix to set out the levels of specification. So we actually use the JCT guide to performance specification, which, although has been withdrawn, we found that the guide provides practical guidance through defined scales of effectively how much specialist design input is required. And we actually have that in the design responsibility matrix, so that everyone understands, an internal wall system is going to be a level C. So there's going to be some specialist design input. And then we've actually, we have further subdivided that into these 2 definitions on screen. So for certain levels, it's a descriptive specification is required, and that will require the specification to provide a comprehensive set of performance requirements, so the contractor is aware of what they need to price for. And we also, for descriptive specifications, sometimes include basis of design. So it doesn't it doesn't limit the level of CDP, but it just helps the tenderer to understand where the design intent has come from. And then prescriptive specifications are obviously much more prescriptive, as the term would go, and it's full responsibility for us. So we will specify the product and go down, make sure that the product is doing what the performance requirements set out that it has to do. And we actually use a D and a P in our specification, so it's really clear in the title of each system. This is a descriptive specification. This is a prescriptive specification. So it's really quick to run through, and you can understand, okay, yeah, I need to, that the contractor is pricing for X and Y. And we've found that just these simple, broad terms are actually quite helpful in the specification writing process.
In Adrian, this must be, the design responsibility matrix must be a key tool for your design managers and how they just sort of manage things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as Ruth said, is how do you structure that in a consistent way? But it's really, really clear who is responsible for what, and actually how that changes across the project stages and how procurement comes on, and where there's there potentially early engagement as well, that the designer is able to engage with the contractor and the supply chain. But yeah, absolutely critical that it's descriptive, prescriptive, and any descriptive specification, as it says in the notes here, is really, really clear around standard compliance and regulation compliance, particularly around fire, particularly in windows or cladding. Have we got the right insulation build-up requirements, the right specification for where cavity barriers might be required as part of the fire strategy? All of that is set out, and then the subcontractor is then responding in terms of the technical design for fabrication that matches that design intent. And again, having to have a collaborative approach on projects, that you don't have this them and us scenario, that everyone's really clear on the requirements, and even into the prescriptive specifications, again, working with the contractor and supply chain in terms of preferred manufacturers. The designers are all really clear as to who we've got on board, that specification actually does match the performance requirement. It does match the client's brief. And again, the design responsibilities matrix, really, really important document to set that out.
And I guess if you do have a bit of a framework with preferred manufacturers, you can brief your architect. It's going to be a descriptive spec. It's going to come from this manufacturer's catalog, and then the specialist can almost produce a prescriptive that meets the descriptive. So you end up with two specifications for that particular system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the procurement routes is a real help of that. Or the earlier we can get on board, stops the board of work from the designers. They get frustrated when we come along late and the products are either not available or the cost has been miscalculated. And we go, look, these are the suppliers that we've got on board. This is the time frame. And we're able to get those specifications right from the very outset. So I think collaborative procurement is really, really important to do that.
And Andrew, and no, the Schumann team don't just offer the specification writing service, but they offer that sort of management service as well, where they want to get it right across a framework or a big project representing the client. Is this a key tool for yourselves as well?
Definitely, yeah. Going back to those sort of initial meetings that we'll have with the client, we'll be asking questions around design responsibility matrices and lists of specialist design items to eke out of each client, each project, what the agreed responsibilities are, because they are key. I mean, there's a chance of over specifying sometimes if you go beyond what is your scope, but then there's equally the chance of under specifying if you have something that is, your prescriptive responsibility you don't quite realize, and you're just not quite hitting the mark with what's in the specification. I think something in terms of responsibilities in that process of being clear about design and in prescriptive, descriptive, there's a lot of content being added around verification into the classification systems and cause and unit class, and I think that's really going to come to the fore in soon, when we need to start like progressively developing specifications between sort of these are the expectations, these are the submittals back from a contractor, there's the agreement, there's the process, there's the verifying that it does what we need it to do, particularly before things like gateway applications for high risk buildings, and then beyond that into then verifying kind of that what was installed is what was intended and that it performs in the way it's intended to perform. So that all ties into who's initially responsible for that item.
Yeah, we haven't talked about those sort of high HRB projects, but I guess going yourself, Adrian, I guess before you do a Gateway 2 submission, going through all of that design responsibility matrix and making sure that level of information is prescriptive for what needs to be prescriptive must be vital.
Yeah, absolutely, because I think everyone can see in the press the challenges that we have now with Gateway 2 is that hard stop before you start on site. And I think we're seeing a lot more moving to the left, all McLeamy curve type stuff, where you want to develop the design at a much more advanced stage before you start on site or you submit your Gateway 2 application, because it reduces risk for everyone on the team. Reduce risk to the client, reduce risk for non-compliance with what's built out on site, and it reduces risk of the whole team developing something that's not going to get accepted by the building safety regulator. And I know you've had Dieter on the support for writing the document and the work that Reba's done around the regulation checklists. Becomes really, really important that specifications and drawings are referenced within that checklist, that we're able to close out each of those items as early as we possibly can. So really, really important on that side.
Like the risk, maybe yourself, Ruth, the risk of project delays, if things are left as descriptive and you put it into the regulator and then they refuse it and say there's not enough information, or worse still, as construction's happening, if
there are changes,
changes, yeah.
No, we're finding that contractors are coming on much earlier, and we're, as Adrian said, we're working with subcontractors early to ensure that the specifications are tied up and that our performance specifications are going in with the prescriptive specifications, to show that what the design intent can be realized, and that's what's going to be bought and that's what's going to be installed on site.
I'm just trying to keep to time here. I could ask more questions on this, but let's just move on to the fourth topic that we chose out of the 10 revisions and change management. And this ties in nicely, I think, with building safety regime and sort of change control. But the two screenshots I've got here in the background on the left-hand side, that's the sort of introduction to the section when something's changed. So there might be 30 clauses in this section, but these are the 5 clauses that are changed. And then on the right-hand side, whether you want to actually highlight what's changed. And when we were doing the sort of focus groups on this, there was a little bit of disagreement. And I've maybe cut yourself, Adrian, as a main contractor employing design partners, are you quite prescriptive saying, this is how I want you to highlight changes in the specifications?
I think we try to be as prescriptive as we can, not just to specifications, but to drawings, to models, to data. They all overlap very much. So we need to make sure that there is an alignment between models, data, specifications, and information. So again, making sure this is clear as it shows on the screen. And as we've talked about earlier, under the new Building Safety Act, the change control process becomes really, really important. We want to try and reduce the amount of change by having early engagement with our subcontractors, manufacturers, and designers, but also then making sure as part of this process, there is a rigorous material approvals process that will be part of that. So there is a change. You're almost going back to, does this material still comply with the regulations and standards? And it needs to be really clear what has been changed. And the example there around the performance with its energy, fire ratings, and there's definitely still confusion as to what some of those ratings are, and making it really clear in the specification what they mean will then impact on how products are changed or substituted for whatever reason during the course of the project.
With the example on the right there, where you're actually it's almost like a Microsoft Word track changes. Do you go that far when you're publishing your specs, or do you leave it as just this clause has changed?
Well, we actually do. We end up publishing two versions of the specification. So we will publish a high level revision specification that will issue out, and that will say if a clause has been revised or if something's new or something's been deleted. But we also have an in-house, effectively the tracked change version, so that if anyone wants further information or if we need to go back, golden thread idea, we have it all backed up and we can verify what's been changed, why it's been changed, and it's all very clear. But we find that issuing a full tracked change specification for certain packages can end up being reams and reams and reams of paper. So actually trying to find the right balance, which is why we end up issuing the high level version, but having the saved version on the file so everything is backed up is the approach that we've taken at the moment.
Yeah. And I don't want to talk too much about NBS in this webinar. We're just trying to keep it on spec writing. But this time last year, we had a meeting in London with the REN Technical Forum, and it was the work we've done on revisions that they said was like the priority for the year. Making sure that when you open the specification, it shows what sections have changed. When you open the section, which clauses have changed.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did discuss around the sort of, do we go down to the track changes level? And I think a good thing about the document we've produced is it's there for people to amend themselves. So that 6.3, if you don't want to do that across your practice or projects, you can remove that from the document. Or if you do, so it's there to sort of aid the discussions to get agreement on how you sort of like to work. And I guess, Andrew, when you're working with a client, these are the discussions you have, like right from day one. How do you want to indicate your revisions and publish your spec, etc.?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, when we're developing that documentation with a client, we'll always provide them with what we call a clean version, and those amendments, additions, removals, things that have been deleted, depending on their kind of commentary back to us. And I think that's as much for the client to be able to see what's been changed, but also for ourselves to have a record of what we've done and why we've done it and how we've done it. But I remember back in practice and when that kind of level of functionality didn't exist and being asked sometimes by the contractor, oh, we've got revision bubbles on the drawings, but we don't have anything similar in the specification. Can you go through and highlight in red everything that you've changed? And something obviously resisted. There's an inherent amount of risk with that, but obviously with the functionality we have there with the detailed revisions, it picks up on every space and gap and punctuation. So it's fantastic. I love it.
I guess because once you start to show what's changed, you've got to get it all right. You don't want it to be 90% correct. You've got to get it all right. And Adrian, just a question, curious one here. Do you ask for the spec revisions to happen all the way through the construction phase as well, almost to get a record spec, or does it depend on the project, the client?
I think it'll depend on the project and the client, but yeah, we do need to have a construction record version of the specification that ties in with the drawings and the models and the data. And I think the more structured that the designers are in terms of their approach, that will make that a lot easier. That it's tracked all the way through. There's probably been an approvals process for any changes. So yeah, having that structured approach, consistency will make that a lot easier. But as we talked about earlier, getting the specs correct earlier will avoid some of these challenges, and we just go out and build what we're supposed to build, and hopefully some of the challenges that we've had in industry around compliance and quality issues that we see in the press will start to reduce as we do become a bit more collaborative and structured around how we approach projects.
Yeah. And do you work through that construction phase on typical projects, Ruth, or does it hit a point where it's sort of, you sort of take a step back and the specification sort of frozen?
Well, it would depend on the project and it depends on the appointment. Sometimes we'll go all the way through, and then the specifications may have to change upon agreement with the contractor. But sometimes we are retained as sort of client representative, so we'll be reviewing other people's specifications and the prescriptive specs. So yeah, it does depend on the project.
Really good, really good. Okay, I think at that point I've been watching the clock, and I think that's 40 minutes worth of discussion. So at that point, I'm gonna massive thank you to our panelists, Andrew, Adrian, and Ruth. So thank you very much.
Yep, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you very much.
So yeah, hopefully that discussion sort of whetted the appetite a little bit, and you want to actually get a copy of the guide and see it yourself, and hopefully take it and tweak it and make it work on your projects. But there's the URL. Everyone on the webinar today will be sent that, but it's available on our website, the nbs.com/, and you can see there if anybody wants to sort of screenshot that. Best practice guide specification writing, and yeah, completely free downloads, and hopefully useful to everyone in the industry, whether you use NBS or not, and whether you agree with 60% of it or 95% of it. It's there as a Creative Commons document for you to sort of tweak and make it work for yourselves. So thank you very much for attending. As mentioned at the start, really like seeing the feedback, so please just add a bit of feedback at the end then, and be really keen to see it. If you think a second webinar like this on the other topics would be useful, more than happy to sort of set that up as well. So yeah, please download the guide. If you're not an NBS user and you want to know more about the NBS platforms for spec writing, or you're a manufacturer and you want to know how to push your product information in front of architects, engineers, then just visit our website, nbs.com, drop an email through to our events team, events@nbs.com, or put the webinar on today, and we'll put you in touch with the right people. If you're an existing NBS customer, you'll know your account manager. And one final thank you to our sponsor, who's provided those great illustrations for the sort of spec references part of the guide, Vectorworks as well. So thank you very much. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.